please. Sure. Engineering. Yeah. Yes, cutting shama BNC, I jump at this thing, the same thing.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for your patience to start with. We just needed to sort out those technical things so that when we go live, there's no interruption. My name is Elijah Mhlanga from the Department of Basic Education. We have the Minister of Basic Education here together with DDG Geya and colleagues Ms. Manana and Mr. Ndlebe, as well as Dr. Motshekga and Dr. Paul is here as well at the back there. We will start with the Minister, who will read a statement, and then we'll go to presentations. We have tried to summarize the presentations. They're quite lengthy, but we've tried to summarize them so that we go only to the main points on the matters that the Minister wishes to focus on today. Minister, I'm going to give over to you so that you can address us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mhlanga. Let me also greet members of the media, our officials from the department, but also fellow South Africans through the media. Indeed, June month is a very important month in our calendar as a country, because it does give us an opportunity to recognize indeed and pay tribute to the youth of our country whose lives were cut short at the hands of the apartheid regime. Their sacrifices and commitment cannot go unnoticed, and it puts on an ongoing basis an obligation for us, an obligation upon us to make sure that we do recognize our young people, we collaborate in equipping them with skills necessary to secure a bright future for our country, but we also take the responsibility to create employment opportunities, particularly for the youth of our country. On our part as DBE, doing a little part beyond educating our young people, we're already on the phase 4 of the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative. Almost 255,000 youth will also be spread throughout our different schools and schools for learners with special needs. Another point really is around early childhood development. It's almost a year that we've received the function. We are very delighted at the opportunity that this presents to us to enable us to elevate the early years as the foundation of education and learning and inject a momentum into government's commitment to deliver access and quality education to every child. We've done lots of work, we've done consultations, and what is guiding us on the framework as we develop the framework of a new ECD program issues of access, to make sure that every child in every corner, Adams, should be able to access an ECD program. We're looking at issues of quality, issues of efficiency, of redress and equity. And we'll keep on reporting the progress we have around this issue. The other matter also was about the May-June exams, because we do want our learners again, those who left school or who dropped or who want to improve their results, to start again registering for the second chance. In June this year, from the 3rd of May up to 14th of June, almost 279,000 young people were doing a matric rewrite. Marking has started, will start this week, and will release the results on the 7th of August 2023. But also as a sector, we've been extremely busy with the Bella Bill. There have been public hearings on the Basic Education Law Amendment Bill, which have been concluded by the Portfolio Committee. Unlike some of the things that have been coming about what the Bella Bill tries to do, is that the Bella Bill is not a wholesale bill that covers all aspects of the sector. It focuses mainly on administrative processes of the department. So it will not speak about curriculum, as some people were speaking about, talking about sexuality. It will not touch on, it's an administrative bill. It's not talking about life orientation, three-stream curriculum, not at all. Other concerns were that we're not talking about the appointment of teachers. That is contained in another other pieces of legislation. Infrastructure issues are also contained in other pieces of legislation, like norms and standards of education. And inclusive education also is covered under White Paper 6. What the bill is focusing on, amongst others, is legalizing or formalizing grade R as part of the curriculum. It's looking at the code of conduct of learners. It's regulating and regularizing the issues around homeschooling, about the rationalization of schools, the banning legally and officially corporal punishment in our schools, including initiation in schools. It's focusing on language policy, admission policy, and also the other matter that we have also paid attention to as a sector is the criminalization of the disruptions of schools. And that's what the bill is doing, not all the other things that members of the opposition are recording themselves and speaking about. It's an administrative bill. It's not talking about other things, and it's not meant to talk about other things. But on the softer side and nicer part, we'd like to invite the public to SASCE, which is the South African Schools Choral Estate Fort, which is taking place next week. It is the country's biggest choral music competition that involves more than 8,000 learners at a national level coming from different provinces. So the Department of Basic Education and the Motshekga Foundation will be hosting this in the Rima Bible School from the 27th to the 30th of June this year. So please come and just enjoy the best that we have. What we also want to speak to you at length is about the reading literacy. Because over the past month, there's been a very good debate about reading in schools. The ongoing public discourse on reading intensified when the results of the pills were released. 404, that said it was revealed. No, we released the report. They were not, and they say it was revealed in the morning. No, we released the results of pills ourselves as a department, so no one revealed them or discovered them. And indeed, the report confirms that South Africa, like virtually all countries, saw lower primary reading competencies declining due to the pandemic related to school disruptions. And the magnitude of a decline relating to the pandemic does not come as a surprise. South Africa was amongst the countries most actively gauging impacts on learning outcomes during the pandemic. And the results we see now in pills are in line with the earlier findings that we did say as a department. I think when we make the presentation, you'll also see what we also had picked up as the learning losses that had occurred because of the pandemic. So I don't want to really speak more about what PILS says, does not say. It will come from Dr. Chetty and Ms. Manona. But more than anything for us, what is important about PILS and the reading is that we have to recognize that learning does not start at grade R or grade R. It starts at 0. So there are steps that the department can do, but it's also what parents can do. And that's why I've been going on these road shows, to make sure that all of us as villagers can identify our role in ensuring that our children are ready for school, and when they're in school, they can sustain whatever is being taught. So whilst as a department, we play a very important role in supporting early learning skills and teaching children how to read, the entire ecosystem must also be involved. Schools do play a very crucial role in providing reading materials, especially for families who rely solely on them. But again, as the entire society, and I must say I was very excited on Thursday when we received beautiful mobile libraries from AFBOP and Oxford and Oxford readers. Beautiful, and that's what we really are doing with these roadshows. I've briefed teachers, I've briefed the governing party, I've briefed NGOs. This is part of ongoing engagements with committees to say, for us to improve our fortunes in reading, this is a whole ecosystem. On Thursday, we had also, it's Wednesday, where we had the release of the reading barometer. And one of the things they were raising, which I said also as a grandmother, I took home, that we can buy children sweets, they will enjoy them, and cakes for the moment. We can buy them toys, they are likely to outgrow them or they even break. But if you buy them gifts, buy them books, you're giving them a life. And it's really to mobilize young parents to say, if it's their birthdays, buy them books. Don't buy them toys only. You may don't buy them toys only. The festive season is coming around. Buy them sweets, but also make sure that you buy them a book. And that's the advice we're also giving to parents, because the whole reading program is going to be an ecosystem. So, I don't want to go through the whole speech because I don't want to take Dr. Chetty's and Manona's time. But thank you very much for making the time, and thank you very much for coming. You didn't expect me to finish. Yes, the whole speech. I didn't go through the whole speech.
Thank you, Minister, and good morning to the senior officials present and to members of the media. My name is Dr. Mark Chetty, and I'll be taking you to some slides that, as Minister has said, follows on from our engagements and to provide more depth to the discussion on reading literacy. The presentation is structured to give you some sense of the data that we have in order to make some informed findings on reading literacy. So we'll be drawing on our studies, our early learning national assessment, which we call ELNA, our systemic evaluation, and PEARLS, and then I will hand over to my colleague who will articulate the next steps and recommendations in our plan going forward. So it's really to give more depth to and to sort of provide the viewers and the public out there, what is it that we are seeing in reading literacy? What is the key sort of takeaway points? And we're hoping that this will provide more of a nuanced discussion on reading literacy other than what's out in the media at the moment. So just to give a context, before we draw on the data, is that prior to the PEARLS release, prior to the pandemic, we were making good progress as a system. And all our international studies, TIMS, which is maths and science, PEARLS, which is on reading comprehension, and SACMEG, which is a regional assessment study, were all showing that we were a system on the rise. But COVID did affect us as a system. And as Minister has outlined, not only South Africa, but all the countries around the world, but more so in developing country context, that we lost a lot of contact time, we lost a lot of teaching time, and this had an impact on the study data. Pearls, for example, was taken in 2021 amidst the pandemic. So this should be borne in mind as we interpret the findings and the study data that we have. But we do recognize that Pearls reveals very low performance levels on learners' ability to read for meaning. But if we just hold it there, we lose a lot of the value and of the richness of the data. So how do we deconstruct this finding to help us do more and to do it better? First of all, I think in deconstructing the finding, we need to get the languaging right. What we're dealing with here is not just learning to read, but rather reading comprehension. So reading comprehension is this interconnected ability. It relies, yes, on word reading, being able to decode, sound of symbols, oral fluency, but it goes deeper. And that's a little bit lost in the narrative. It deals with language comprehension, being able to understand the meaning of words and sentences. So readers or learners who have a strong reading comprehension level can then draw appropriate responses and make conclusions after reading a text. So we want to share data from these three sort of studies that give a trajectory of learners' reading literacy levels, drawing on early and emergent reading skills, our foundational reading comprehension skills, and how do our learners cope on internationally benchmarked assessments. Now, starting with ELNA, which is at a very young age, learners at the age 6, the framework for ELNA looks at these early and emergent reading literacy skills. And what is the ability of our learners to be able to have a working memory, listening comprehension, phonemic awareness? All these are interrelated in understanding reading literacy. Now, what do the results show? At an age 6, coming into grade 1, the overall emerging literacy mean is 64%. Now, this can be broken up into subcomponents, which are very critical for the sector to understand emerging reading literacy skills, because it combines listening and speaking, phonics, reading skills at an early age, and writing skills. And these figures, and you'll have the presentation, to sort of dissect it further, and it's in our reports as well. But we're saying that the overall percentage is above 60%, which means there is an emerging proficiency of learners entering grade 1 on reading literacy. We disaggregate this across different language groupings because we want to track how learners are doing in the different official languages, and we can see that it's more or less consistent, but some languages are a little bit lower than the others. Also by gender, and it's an important subpopulation that we're tracking, we see that the girls are performing better than the boys, even at that early age. Across quintiles and school settings, it's fairly consistent on an average of 60%, with quintile 5, our more well-resourced schools, performing above the other 4 quintiles. It does show a strong link to resources when understanding reading literacy. Across locations in our provinces, we can see Western Cape performing above the national mean, and Northern Cape and Eastern Cape, and provinces like Limpopo and Northwest are lower than the national mean. Now, we can track this by substrate and by location, but the picture remains the same, that at this early age, that learners do have some good foundational blocks in which we can build on and take forward as a sector. Now, going into their foundational reading comprehension skills, we are tracking this at the grade 3, 6, and grade 9 level, where we can place these scores on a single scale. The scores there also show, this is a locally national assessment, but it's modeled on the same design as Pearls, except that it's locally set text. Our grade 3 learners score around 438 points. To put it into a little bit of a context, we're using a scale of a 0 to 1,000, and around 400 is usually a benchmark that countries use internationally. So our grade 3 learners are performing above the 400 benchmark, And what it does show is that as they stay in the system, this graph shows that their growth in reading comprehension skills incrementally gets better. So increases to 522 at the grade 6 level and 592 at the grade 9 level. So the longer the learners stay in school, as they're exposed to more skills on reading comprehension, their reading comprehension gets better. And what's significant is that it is in line with international norms, which is around 30 points per grade. So we are tracking important subpopulations. As with ELNA, even on systemic evaluation, you can see that the girl scores of these graphs are much higher than the boy learner. So the boy is an at-risk learner, and we need to pay more attention to strengthening the reading comprehension skills of our boy learners. The girls are almost 1.1 year ahead of the boy learner at the grade 3 level. And this stays fairly consistent in grade 6 and at grade 9, so as they progress. Across languages, a similar picture to what we're observing in ELNA, with some languages, like Sepedi and Setswana, lower than English and Afrikaans, but the encouraging news is that they are all above the 400 benchmark, except Setswana. By location, we can see that it's a similar picture with our more well-resourced provinces, such as Western Cape, performing higher than provinces that are more rural in nature, like Limpopo and Northwest. Now, in terms of the PEARLS, which is our international benchmark on reading comprehension, it's important to understand the framework as well, because again, it's kind of lost in the narrative that the PEARLS framework is quite a robust framework, looking at two very distinct purposes of reading, literary experience, and acquire and use information. So learners at the age of 10 are going to increasingly use these skills in also other subjects, geography, social science, mathematics, and so forth. But also critically, in each of these two types of reading, there are very distinct processes of comprehension. They got to focus and retrieve explicitly stated information. They must be able to make inferences, but they must be also able to interpret, integrate ideas and information. They must also be able to evaluate and critique content and textual elements. So all this is broken up, and learners are exposed to these texts, and they have to use these comprehension skills and articulate a response. So it's not just straightforward answering of questions. That's the takeaway point. What does PEARLS show? So we did have a significant drop from the previous cycle, from 320 points to 288, a difference of 32 points, and that translates into 81% of grade 4 learners and 56% of grade 6 learners that are not reaching the 400 benchmark point. Grade 6 learners, however, did score 384 points, with Afrikaans being the highest performing languages, and that's across grade 4 and grade 6. Western Cape has the highest scores, as with ELNA and systemic evaluation, and they are significantly higher than Northwest. And again, girls are significantly outperforming boys, even on the international test, almost a year and a half ahead of the boys. Across different languages, we see similar patterns as with ELNA and systemic evaluation. And we are tracking that by province, and we see similar observations coming through. So these are important sort of subpopulations that are helping us inform our strategy going forward. Across grade 4 and grade 6, it's a similar pattern of performance. So what do we take away from these three studies? There's a lot of contextual data in each and every one of them, where we have to look at an intersection of classroom factors, home factors, and school factors. So how engaged learners are in the classroom, their instructional time, their engagement at home with parents, the motivation of learners to read different texts and to acquire and use information, being in a stable school environment where there's less discipline, less bullying, having access to different kinds of reading materials, even encouraging the love of reading. All those factors in the data shows it increases learner performance. So learners in homes with strong and varied reading materials are doing better than those that don't. Those that are in more stable school environments are outperforming those that don't. So this contextual data is something that must also give more of a nuanced discussion on reading literacy. And it's factors that we are using as a department to structure our reading plan. So let me summarize the findings from these 3 studies. What are the key takeaway points? So South African learners do find the international passages difficult to answer, both for literary and informational text. But it's international passages. So, and with the respect to the processes of reading comprehension, the scores on reading comprehension in African home languages observed across the different studies are lower than expected, and that's going to be our focus of attention going forward. But there is some contextual factors, and COVID did play a significant and had a substantial negative effect on learners' scores. And the effect was even more pronounced in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities where there is insufficient home resources and those that are attending schools in more rural provinces. The green shoots and the positives is that our national assessment data from ALNA and our systemic evaluation show positive growth points, and there are green shoots in emerging reading and foundational comprehension. So as learners progress through the different grades, this incremental growth is consistent in reading comprehension skills. Program Director, I'm going to pause there and hand over to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Motshekga. Good morning, Minister and colleagues, members of the media, and to the viewers at home. My name is Kulula Manona. I am the Chief Director for Foundations for Learning. I'm just going to move very swiftly from where Dr. Motshekga has left us. What is the importance of all of this information that he has just shared with us? This information is going to be used to inform a program design that is going to allow for this data to be utilized. And as a system, we work through what we call an institutional infrastructure that has different levels. There's national, there's province, there's district, the circuit, and right up to the schooling level. So using the technical advisory group that has been appointed by the department to help us mine this data from the PALs, we are going to design a capacity building program that is going to be taken through all of these levels to allow everyone at this level, starting from national right up to the schools, as I've said, to be able to utilize this data to inform practice and to also inform strategy. I do want us to actually also be reminded of the fact that even before PALs and LNAM systemic evaluations were written, we were, as a department, on a trajectory to improving. We were recognized post the 2006 PALs as a fast-growing nation in terms of reading outcomes. Yes, we do acknowledge that COVID has set us back. But using a framework that predated PALs, which was an integrated reading sector plan, we had implemented a number of interventions across all provinces. We had also used evidence to design programs that were part of those interventions. We used post the pandemic data and evidence on learning losses to generate information that we used to inform our focus areas. We also, as we had to revise the annual teaching plans as a quick response to COVID, we ensured that we foregrounded reading skills in the interventions that we rolled out, and we also upped our game when it came to monitoring and giving oversight on the implementation of strategies. Here we're just sharing with you some of those interventions that we put in place. For instance, post the 2016 PALs, we went on to develop reading benchmarks, and these are very key, particularly in African languages, because we never had them before 2016. And so these are enabling teachers now to be able to know and to track where learners should be, what key literacy skills learners should acquire at which stage, and how to immediately intervene if they see that their learners are lagging behind. We have completed 10 of these now. We only have one outstanding language, and we are going to be concluding that benchmark in that language before the end of this year. I've spoken about the fact that we have used data. For instance, one of our key data programs is the early grade reading study, which has informed us in terms of what are the key issues and the key elements of a successful early grade reading program. We implemented at scale the primary reading improvement program, and this has also ensured us that we're able to focus on a level within the school that is able to provide that in-classroom support to the teachers, and I'm talking about departmental heads. So through the primary school reading improvement program, we've been able to focus on skilling and upskilling our departmental heads to be able to support teachers in schools. We continue to interface with communities, with parents, through the Read to Lead campaign, where we mobilize support, where we also just use that campaign as a voice that we amplify to get South Africans to rally behind the department in ensuring that reading and reading literacy is not only a matter and an issue of schools, but parents, communities at large, and the rest of South Africa comes along on this journey with us. Provision of LTSM, I think Minister spoke about the fact that schools provide LTSM. We continue to support our teachers through teacher development programs. And Minister spoke about the deployment of young people in our schools. They've been very useful in supporting our teachers so that our teachers could have their hands freed up to be able to teach. I do want to say to you that these young people, these teacher assistants and reading champions are not there to replace teachers, but they are there to allow teachers to do what teachers do best by providing the environment that the teacher needs. And we continue to rely and mobilize partners to walk along on the journey with us. But the release of all these results, as well as the fact that we received the early childhood development function on the 1st of April in 2022, gave us an opportunity to rethink and to really assess and reassess whether we were on the right trajectory when it comes to a strategic response. So what we have done now is to review the current integrated reading sector plan. What we found when we undertook that review was that perhaps we were too broad, and because that plan was built on 10 key pillars, we've now thought of the fact that we really do need to be much more focused, and we have therefore reduced the 10 key pillars to 4 key strategic pillars with 3 cross-cutting pillars. I'm going to show you that in the upcoming slides. We also recognize that perhaps even since the dawn of our democracy, we've been using English logic in creating African languages and literacy programs. And so what we're doing now is that we're going to be centering African languages as a basis for program development. African languages, when it comes to materials developed for African languages, because many of you may know that many materials that are out there have been versioned from English, and we will also continue to develop our teachers' capacity and upskill them to be able to direct learning for African children in African languages, particularly in the foundation phase. This has also ushered a very heated debate around the science of reading itself. And what it has helped us to do is really to confront whether the current science of reading that is being applied is suited for teaching reading literacy to African children in African languages in the foundation phase especially, and even in the intermediate phase. So what we are coming up with through this review is that the science of reading should be over-encompassing to include simultaneous attention to explicit and sequenced phonics on the one hand, and incidental reading literacy opportunities offered by rich texts on the other hand. So we're talking about implementing and applying an intentional, holistic approach in all languages. And again, it will also include language-specific components such as morphemic awareness in languages of Bantu origin, because this is how these languages actually behave. Again, we are not going to ignore the fact that our children still need to switch or transition to English, because we know that English is the language of teaching and learning. So we will continue to arm our teachers to be able to interface between Nepal and African languages literacies, which are explicitly delineated. I'm going to move from the science of reading. I've spoken about the fact that the new strategy is built now on 4 key pillars, which is an explicit policy framework that will be able to support age-appropriate and culturally relevant LTSMs. LTSM means learning and teaching support materials, as well as inform how we skill our teachers. And when we talk about skilling our teachers, we start from where teachers are prepared, which is with the institutions of higher education that prepare our teachers, and how we continue when our teachers join the service through what we call continuing professional development programs. And we will also continue to interface with our parents and communities. We will be implementing on an ongoing basis to improve that feedback loop, monitoring and evaluation programs, and I've spoken about the importance of partnerships, advocacy, and communications. This just explains better how this new strategy, through this quick snapshot, is going to look like. It will inform that our children read for meaning in any language by age 4, and it will be a strategy that is informed by an explicit reading and literacy policy framework that allows for parents and communities to be engaged, that allows for LTSM that is age appropriate and culturally appropriate, as well as our teachers through the training and development programs. I've spoken about the fact that it has implementations for all levels, starting from national up to all the levels of the school, as well as the community. Continuing on this trend, I do want to say that when we talk about revising this strategy, we are talking about refining our policy to explicitly guide the development of reading literacy, and this will ensure and help us to be able to develop and design a comprehensive early grade reading program which will incorporate best practices. I've spoken about the fact that we are driving this through evidence that we have generated from the early grade reading study. We understand that, and I think the Minister said in her speech, that reading literacy begins from birth. And so this strategy will also ensure that we start with improvements from ECD, so that our children, when they join school, are school ready. The primary focus is going to be home language literacy with added support for English, and I've spoken about LTSMs, as well as focusing our teacher development, as well as teacher preparation in universities on being able to teach home language literacy. We will continue mobilizing parents. We will be tracking progress, and some of you may recall that the ELNA and systemic evaluation and the PULSE and the FIRST studies or barometers that we've released as a department right before or just at the point when we were receiving the early childhood development function, we released the Thrive by 5 index, which has been very useful in telling us that our 4 and 5-year-olds start school, not school ready. The key lever for this strategy to be successful is going to be our teachers. We saw that when our children were taken out of classrooms during the pandemic, we landed where we have landed with the results of the PULSE. So we are going to be able to ensure that the teachers are provided with comprehensive and holistic approaches that recognize the difference between African languages and non-African languages and literacy predictions and practices. We will support them through a better and an expanded repertoire of instructional methods, and particularly helping them to be able to teach or handle the hard-to-teach methods like the group-guided reading, providing them with a comprehensive LTSM support. We will build the capacity of the departmental heads and subject advisors. We know that there are systemic challenges that we are trying to eliminate. For instance, one of those is that there are large classrooms that teachers really that are militating against, particularly foundation phase teachers, to be able to teach and manage those large classrooms. Posts in situations where they are vacant need to be filled in. And so we also don't forget that our children have barriers, and we even have children who have serious barriers to learning and to literacy achievements. And so we will continue to strengthen our policies. For instance, the policy that helps our teachers to be able to identify and remediate against those challenges, so barriers. We can't do this alone. We're going to continue to rely on this reading ecosystem to be able to support us. Minister spoke about the fact she's already spoken and taken this strategy through a number of stakeholder sessions. We have them there, including the big consultative dialogue, which she led with reading literacy experts from the state and from the non-state sector, as well as from the teachers. We have captured some of the key proposals that have emerged from those different stakeholder sessions, and we were using those to inform our strategy strengthening processes. And what is left now is to finalize that and to take it through another round of consultation, and as well as securing funding before we approve it and roll it out. And thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ms. Kulula. Thank you so much, Dr. Chetty, and indeed the Minister. I'm now going to ask that we go to question time. If there are questions, you will start by introducing yourself, and then you ask a question, and then they will attend to it. I'm seeing one hand for now. Now there's three. Okay. Okay, so let me start here. Your name, please.
What were the reasons for Limpopo and Northwest to report the below average on reading literacy? And what are you doing to assist these two provinces?
All right, thank you for that, Fumolemo. Heidi?
Okay, so Heidi Jokers from the NCA. I'm very confused, and I think South Africa is also very confused. I just want clarity on this African languages thing, because if you're noticing a bit of an issue with the African languages, how do you approach that? Is it being taught in English? Like, how do we approach that? Because what's being spoken at home and then being taught at school, I don't speak English, is not my home language, and I struggled when I went to school because I understand things in Greek, but when I go to school, I'm being taught in English. So how is that going to happen? If I could just get clarity on that. Yeah, that's just
Okay.
for now. Thanks.
All right. Sorry.
So from DBE TV News. Mine also relates to African languages. Just a question if there's enough material of African languages. And also just what Heidi said, because the issue is, of course, like she says, you understand things in your home language. But yeah, I think it's also maybe what is the plan when it comes to that situation, and how much material does DBE actually have in African languages to be able to allow for it to be taught in schools? It seems it's a big thing. Even the minister spoke about it quite a few times, that the African languages need to be brought in. So how much material is there when we aren't seeing a lot of books being written in African languages?
All right, thank you. Let's make that a first round. Minister, would you please ask me to get Dr. Chetty to deal with this, or you want to go first?
You'll come and help me.
Yeah, there's that technical issue there about reading performance and reading for meaning.
No, Dr. Chetty will speak to that, because I found that very interesting when we were getting the PILS reports. Because most people are quite surprised to say, how does a 5 or even a 10-year-old find it difficult to read that John is eating? I mean, it's just combining two words. And it's been very important for us to explain the difference between what we call oral performance, where you can read, pronounce, punctuate properly, and also using the information that you are reading. And I think, or maybe let me just give the example around some of the texts which were used in PILS 2021, which I found quite revealing. I mean, the other one is about octopus. So on the African languages, I said to myself, the world in me, I don't know what you call octopus kasisotho, and that I will understand. It will be the first time that I would hear a word like that in Sesotho. Otherwise, it will be a new creation. So you already have a language barrier. Whether you translate it, whether you say it in English, it's just already a barrier. But what is nice about reading the PILS, then they had to answer questions about the octopus. So the text explains the octopus has got 6 legs, it does the following, it's friendly, it stays deep in the sea. When they ask questions, they don't ask you about what is the habitat of octopus. They say the octopus can go through stones. Why do you think it's so? It's not in the text. Then they have to really, when you speak about inferring, say because it doesn't have bones, just fleshy, so it can go flat. And that's where reading for meaning is, where you can apply the information, not talk about the fact that the octopus stays deep in the sea, it's got so many legs, it's red, but using that information, getting meaning from what you have read. So that's what I think sometimes people find it difficult to appreciate when you say, our kids can't read for meaning. It means they can't use that information to analyze, to be critical, to infer. Most of the time, the point is your 30% point of recall. They can recall what you're saying, but they cannot apply the information that they have read into a different situation. That's what I should. So let me talk about African language. It's a very important topic that I think as a country we have to confront once and for all if we want to move forward. We are one of the countries that were assessed in about 11 languages to start with. So our kids had to be assessed in Chivenda and other things, Zulu, 11. If you look at provinces that are doing well, are partly monolingual provinces. KZN is almost monolingual. Eastern Cape is monolingual. But the other challenge also is about access in materials in those languages. There's lots of books which are written in Sizulu. There are lots of books written in Afrikaans. So there's also a question of access to materials in those languages. And that's what we're looking at. The donation we're receiving from AFBOB of those 500 books per school were in the different African languages. So we're trying to increase, working Abona Libali, to increase the availability of reading material in African languages. But the problem goes beyond that, as I said. It's really the development of African languages. As I said, I don't know, I still have to see what they called the octopus in Sesotho or in other things. I don't know what they call the octopus. So it's a development of languages. But what is coming through that we have to confront with even scientists that are working with us in languages is about the differences in teaching African languages. African languages are close to Africans. They are very transparent languages. They are very transparent, unlike in English. So teaching English as a language is a very difficult one. Sometimes the S is called dogs. At some stage, the S is it's cats. So you have to teach kids. Sometimes there's a cough, which is a GH. At some stage, the F is an F. So there are different sciences in terms of teaching those languages. African languages are also what we call syntactic languages. That's how it's going to go. And it's like Africans, where what you see is what you get, and what you say is what is in the text. So there's also the science of language that is there also, which we're beginning to confront to say, let's see what the science is. And also, I mean, in these studies, they also work with neuroscientists, which then assess children that when they are taught in the African language, what happens in those brain parts. And it says if a child is not bullied, is happy, is comfortable, is in a language that speaks to them, they're able to learn better. Not because maybe of the language proficiency, but it's a language they're comfortable in, and their brains parts are able to function properly. And so those are the things that we use also in this test to say, what happens in the process of learning? When a child sees the word, goes to the brain, what's a process that takes place. But I think more than anything, the one I really wanted to emphasize, it's about access and availability of books in African languages and making sure that they're accessible to us, but even as government to have a coherent policy around languages. We have received the function of ECD. Each time I go to ECD, I do find these practitioners, because the young mothers want their kids to speak in English. So the poor teachers, even in the ECD, 2-year-olds are spoken to in English. Before I take your time, I went with the Belgian queen to Soweto, and she was supposed to read, and I was worried to say, I wonder what is she going to read to these 2-year-olds. And she started reading a text in English, and the poor kid, I could see they were busy touching her hair, because, I mean, honestly, and just excited to see her there, because what she was saying, they didn't hear, so they were really attracted to things that and I could see it's a waste of their time, it's a waste of children's time. And then in ECD, young mothers want their kids to speak in English. They come to school, grade 1, we say mother tongue instruction. There's a complete disjuncture in terms of what we do earlier, what we do at schools, and what we do. So we have to make sure that in terms of policy, we clean up that space, because it is also a space that needs attention. So I thought I should answer to these ones about African languages. And the push for mother tongue instruction should be strong, because we can see with Africans, it's mother tongue instructions, it works for them. This myth that if you don't study in your language, if you're going to do a matric in Sesotho, you won't be able to do medicine, it's not true. You'll be able to do medicine in English when you have to go to university. Eastern Cape, which also is performing relatively well, has run a 12-year full study of teaching a pilot group in Xhosa and another group in English. And the results were amazing. Obviously, those that were taught in Xhosa, in maths, they performed better than those who were taught in English. But what was revealing that the very group that was taught in Xhosa performed better in English compared to those who were taught, were using English as a medium of instruction, which says a lot about the importance of mother tongue instruction. So, check us, doctor. You can speak about reading for meaning, which I really find.
Thank you, Minister. I just thought we'd just share some slides so that we can give a little bit more context to this, what Minister is talking about. And let me just put this on there. So this is the amazing octopus. And if you go through all the Pearl's passages, and some are released and some are not because it's a trend study, then you see the level of complexity that we're dealing with here. And that it's different from just sounding of words. Here you really have to have a sound understanding of comprehension skills. So this is about, our grade 4 learners will ask questions about an octopus in its environments, both in the ocean and in the aquarium. What are some of the characteristics of octopus? And, how do they sort of learn to do things? It's amazing. Octopus can do lots of things. They can solve puzzles, which we didn't even know. So the level of complexity is what we want to highlight. And the word count is even, quite demanding in terms of our local curriculum. So it's something as takeaway points we need to investigate. We are doing more diagnostics on an item level to get a better understanding of how our learners are coping with these texts. And we're going to do it per language grouping, and we're going to do it for each of the different passages. So it's the takeaway point that we want to emphasize, as Minister said, there's a science of reading, there's a complexity to reading. And what we're dealing with here is quite a high cognitive demand on passages that are internationally set. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Kulula. I'm not sure whether you want to expand more. Is there still time? Okay.
The logic of English, which is a dominant language, and apply it in designing African languages, programs and solutions and when we're even looking at just at curriculum. So I think that is where we've found that there is that serious challenge. And if you again think about the preparation of our teachers, who are foundation-based teachers, who have to teach African languages, literacies, in children who speak African language, yet those teachers themselves were prepared in universities in the medium of mostly English. And now just imagine that teacher who is prepared in the medium of English and then has to be confronted in a classroom with learners who speak a variety of African languages. And she also speaks one of those languages that the children speak, and she has to do that transition and that conversion in her head to be able to drive teaching and learning in a classroom of African languages. So these are the things that really touch to the core of our democratic principles and the core of social justice principles of redress. And I think at this point, this is the big policy debate that these results have really ushered. Minister spoke about, and I think one of you spoke about perhaps the fact that there is poverty of materials when it comes to African languages materials. Many of the materials that are out there are versioned, and if then there's versioning of materials, there is something that gets lost when materials are not developed directly in the languages of the children, as well as the medium in which we want that story or that informative text to be transported through. So we can also give examples. For instance, even in the catalog that we have, there are instances where we could not find books, particularly in the mostly underserved languages. And we know that our underserved languages, for instance, are the languages that are spoken in our region of the country, where Limpopo is. So these are the things that we know that they have to change. And when we talk about book development, it's not just the department that develops books. We have a whole value chain, and we have an ecosystem that we tap to when it comes to the development of materials. And we have been struggling to find materials, quality materials, in some of these languages that are quite underserved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Maskulula, Manana, and Dr. Chetty. Okay, we'll get the one last question, I hope. Sarah?
So, Manana just spoke about the quality of the African languages and the quality of it. What is the way forward then to ensure that when the African languages are taught, that you actually have the right quality? That is the one question. Then the other, besides the reading losses that we've seen, do you then feel as a department that the Pearls study is somewhat unfair on our learners? I mean, something like an octopus, and I had a conversation with Professor Mary Metcalf the other day, and she also brought up the octopus sentence, and she said it's which child can speak like that, and it sounded very complex. So do you find that the Pearls report and the text within that report and what learners are expected to speak to is unfair to the learners of South Africa?
So I'm going to ask Dr. Motshekga perhaps to respond to the latter. So when it comes to ensuring that we have these materials and they are of quality and they are developed in the languages of the materials. So, Minister spoke about tapping into the ecosystem. For instance, the National Reading Barometer that was released on Wednesday last week saw gathered in one room a range of stakeholders and role players within the book development value chain. And so there were publishers in that space. And also when we had the dialogue on, I think one of the, I think two Tuesdays past, we also had invited those role players, like the NGO role players. We had invited the publishers as well, so that they become part of co-creating this better South Africa and this better space where we can say that we have these books that are developed in the languages that the children speak. And there is appetite to really come in along on the journey, as I've said earlier on, to understand that this is one of the challenges and we can't continue saying that this is a challenge year after year. So there is appetite for materials to be developed in the languages that matter most. I'm going to ask Mark to speak about the fairness or unfairness of the PALs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's an interesting debate. And, you know, as a system, through the leadership of the Minister, we've always prided ourselves on robust assessment measures. So we're not scared of participating in an international study. We're not participating to compete with the Russias or the Singapores, who are the top performing countries. But we're looking to learn from what is happening in those country contexts. In terms of a national assessment framework that's fair, so you have to have different types of measures. So we have local assessments, we have regional assessments, and we have international. So to use the information just on pearls would be unfair. But we have a framework that combines this data, and we are looking to use it in a complementary way so that we get a holistic picture. Prof. Metcalf also speaks about stretching learners' abilities. So pearls will do that. It will stretch South African learners. But it's not the sole source of data that we need to use. We need to complement it by robust national assessment measures.
Thank you, Dr. Chetty. I think we have come to the end because there are no questions, and we've said all that we needed to say for the day. But the discussion, the engagement is ongoing. The consultations that the Minister spoke about are continuing with different stakeholders, including the media. I think the questions that Heidi was also talking about of confusion, we will continue to clarify that. Thank you so much for the time today. We really appreciate it. Minister, thank you so much together with your team. We really appreciate it. Thank you.